Everybody. How exciting to be on here today and to have Rachel DeMille to join us. I cannot wait to have you be able to see her. I'm just going to invite her on right now. There we go. Yay, Rachel. Good to see you.
Hey there. Let me see if I can adjust this so my camera doesn't fall.
Oh, yeah, that's always helpful, isn't it? Yes. I actually was just going to share a little bit with everybody about you. Is that all right? A little bit Absolutely. Of your bio. Hey, awesome. Rachel DeMille is the wife of Oliver, mother of 8. Wow, I love it. And counting. Co-creator of TJED and on a mission to heal families, inspire others to detect, refine, and unleash their genius, and anxiously awaiting more grandbabies. Me too. It's the best thing ever, isn't it? Currently building a mini farm, wondering if it's going to push her over the edge. I bet.
Yep, that's pretty much me.
That is wonderful. Then I want to read just a little bit about TJED. So I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to share a little bit more with you on TJED. Leadership education, also known as Thomas Jefferson Education or TJED, is a philosophy and methodology where parents, teachers, and mentors honor and facilitate the developmental phases of learning and use the 7 keys of great. Oh, you can see us both. Great. Natalie says she can see us both. And use the 7 keys of great teaching to help each individual student discover, refine his or her unique, innate genius, and get an education to match their mission. So I love what TJED is and what it's all about. I mean, you guys are seriously my mentors in homeschooling. Can I tell you, like, my main mentors? So I have to tell you a little bit about my story. So it's been 25 years ago or so, and I was really wrestling with, do I homeschool or not? And frankly, I just really didn't want to, but I was thinking that I felt, as I pondered about it, I felt really strongly, specifically for one, but then I just felt like I should do it for all my kids. So I remember going that summer to a homeschooling conference, and I was so overwhelmed. I was overwhelmed by all of the different curriculums there are out there, all the different directions that you could go. And I just remember thinking, I have no idea. This feels so overwhelming. And then I actually went to your husband's class and I heard him speak. And that so resonated with me, learning like the mentors, learning like they used to learn, you know, back in the days of our founding fathers. And it also resonated with me because my other mentor is Annette Tillman-Dick, who has been on here and been interviewed, and she homeschooled all of her children, 11 children. She started 10 years before I did. And some of the things that she said that she did in her homeschooling was very similar to what Oliver had talked about. And as I listened, it just made so much sense to my mind and to my heart that I was really excited to jump in. And I can't say I was the perfect TJEDer, but I did. That was like my #1 book.
I don't know what a perfect TJEDer is. I think you should be a perfect parent or a perfect person to be a perfect TJEDer. And I don't aspire to be a perfect TJEDer. I just want to do the next right thing. I think we can all do the next right thing. So my screen keeps darkening. So if you see me reaching forward, I'm just trying to make it so I can keep seeing you.
Oh, okay.
Not
okay,
perfect.
That's perfect. No worries. I might keep my glasses on so I can see the comments then. You know, the over 40s issue that happens to the best of us. I love that perspective because you're right. None of us need to be perfect at any one thing that we do, but this was the #1 thing that I used in my homeschooling, and it was so incredibly powerful. I tell everybody about your book. And I know there's more than one. In fact, I'm going to bring a couple. You can see how well read this one is. I have so many notes, and this is the Thomas Jefferson Education. And then you've got the phases of learning as well. So at the very end, I'd love for you to share just a few more of, you know, your books or anything else that, you know.
Well, and I might pepper them through, you know, as we're talking too.
Perfect. So. That is perfect. So let's get started. Can you just give everybody a brief explanation? We talked about it a tiny bit, but a brief explanation of what TJED is.
Absolutely. You mentioned in the introduction that our tagline, if you will, our motto is an education to match your mission. And that is TJED in a nutshell. And you can imagine that because it proposes to inform the education of a variety of different people and a variety of different needs and missions, it can and should look different from one family to the next, and even from one child to the next. But there are principles
yes.
that are significant, that are harmonious, that come into play. It is, well, let me just say this. The books, it's a series of books, right? TJED is a series of books that describe a way of life that is purpose-driven to become a self-educator from early childhood, clear up through grandparenting, and meeting the needs of each of those phases so that you can optimize your development and your purpose and the lessons of each time of life. It's a way to organize your home. It's a way to facilitate communication with spouses and communicate with children. It's a way to work together as a family. It is a way to detect your child's interests, their needs, their fears, their aspirations. It is a way to train and discipline your children. It's a way to become an expert in the things that you hold dear. It is daily homeschool resources. It's a way to mentor youth in classical education. It is a broad vision. It's not just another curriculum, right? It's kind of a lifestyle. It's a paradigm. It's a way of seeing the world, a way of seeing yourself and your family. And because it is that broad, it means different things to different people, and it's very encompassing.
I love that. I love it because it is all encompassing. I love it because it becomes your everyday life. It just becomes part of it, which is so powerful because everything you do, it just draws you to learn in those kind of ways. And I feel like it, for me at least, it made me look outside the box of what I was used to, how I grew up, right? Doing my schooling. And so it was very different, but I loved that feeling and that openness and what was possible.
When we all do that naturally, right? We get into our teen years and we start, you know, identifying ourselves as an individual and not just as an extension of our parents or a function of our family. And we start to question and try to define what are our truths and how do we relate with the world. And even more so as we go on to have families of our own, all of a sudden, you know, you hear yourself sounding like your mom and you're like, wait, is that exactly how I want to be? And you have to challenge like every assumption and say, oh, I love the way she did this and I want to be sure and pass that on. And oh, that doesn't really feel natural for me. And I want to, but what is right for me? And so we constantly are doing this thing, or at least ideally, we're constantly challenging our assumptions. Not everybody gets that luxury. I mean, you know, and not everybody, you know, it actually occurs to them to challenge all the assumptions. They're more used to going with whatever has always been done before. But there is no such thing, to be honest, as what always has been.
Yes,
there really isn't.
I like
there
that.
There is a mainstream popular definition of what is normal, but even that, it's not normal and it's not historical. It's just one way. So the idea that you can individualize and personalize and idealize and be deliberate about the decisions for how you parent, how you learn, how you know, communicate, how you train and discipline, all of these things, the fact that you can be deliberate and that there are tried and true principles that have been applied in great lives and great places throughout history, that to me is empowering because I am aspirational. I am an idealist and I'm not perfect. My kids aren't perfect. We're not everything that everybody wants to be. We're just us, but we are deliberate. We are really making conscious choices about what we want our life to be and what we want our family to be.
I love those a couple words that you use, deliberate. So being that deliberate in your life and with your kids is so powerful. And you've already seen that now that your kids have got, you know, to different ages. How old's your oldest now?
My oldest is 30, and
30.
I had two sons-in-laws who are older than that still, and I claim them. They're mine too. So yeah, we've got 6 adult kids. So when we first started this out, I don't know how old you are, Michelle, or when you saw Oliver, but
it was, my oldest is 34, so we're probably pretty close in age. Without being specific, right?
Back in the day, I mean, we've been doing this since the early 90s. We're not the pioneers, but you know, because there are people that came before us, and God bless them, because we really needed somebody to blaze those trails. But we've been at this a long time, and a lot of what we teach now has been informed by practical experience. That back then it was more ideal. We were drawing on the classics and luminaries from history to find our fit for what we wanted, what our models and the examples of what we were trying to do. So a lot of what we talked about was, I wouldn't say hypothetical because history had proven it, but we hadn't experienced it in our own home.
Right.
That's no longer the case. We're 3 decades in, and guess what? It works.
It does.
It does.
And I have to second that. I have to totally second that with my family, because again, that was the number one thing that I used in my homeschooling, because it felt true to my heart. I just knew it. Well, what you just said sort of brings us to the next question. What not benefits, but what drew you to find all these principles that you use in TJED? And, you know, you talked about that a little bit, you know, founding fathers, but what specifically drew you to find these things that you share with everybody?
I love this question because knowing where it came from and why it came to be, to me, rounds out a context for leadership education for TJED that I think for a lot of people is missing. And knowing why we do what we do, I think makes all the difference. It really started, you know, early on in my husband's life. He had this sense of purpose. Like, he was born to make a difference. He had this burning desire to spread freedom. And so he did a lot of study in history and philosophy and economics and political science, things that for him were the education of a statesman. He didn't know if he was going to go into politics or be a lawyer. You know, as a youth, the things that you feel drawn to, you don't know what it means ultimately. I mean, you think you know, you say you know,
right.
But life gives you so many, you know, twists and turns, and it's kind of a maze. But the clarity that he felt on what was important to him, what drove him, was he wanted to spread freedom. And ultimately, as a young adult, he had the opportunity to mentor with a great researcher and historian. And it really just sort of solidified his feelings about who he was and what he was for, my husband. And ultimately, he was drawn to the education of the founding fathers, which was kind of singular because, I mean, you can find heroes and great people all throughout history, men and women of every continent, every race, right? But to find such a concentration of so many in one place at one time, so coordinated to a singular purpose, was really kind of extraordinary. To have the founding fathers be all of those guys, all of those gals at the same place at the same time. And so the question that came to him was, how is it possible that Madison and Jefferson were who they were in the moment of need, when it was time to be the father of the Constitution, when it was time to write the Declaration? What was it that prepared them for that moment in time? And of course, we know Jefferson's writings are voluminous, and you know what he did when he was 24, when he was 20, when he was 16. And so to say, how was it that he studied so hard through his youth and young adulthood? What kind of a person is willing to do that? And how, more to the point, if we're going to be that kind of person today, if our children are going to be ready for the moment that they need to be, whatever their call is, whatever their calling is, what do they need to do so that they're ready in the way that Jefferson and Madison were ready when the call came for them. And this is why we call it a Thomas Jefferson education. Not because we're trying to copy what he did or duplicate what he studied, but because he's kind of the icon of being ready when the moment called.
Right. And I love that, because you're right. You do have to be ready for whatever that moment is. I mean, we look around in the world right now and there's so much going on, and you can't just jump into something and be ready right that second. There has to be lots of time in training and learning those things so that you are ready for that moment, whatever that is for you.
So we know for sure that Jefferson studied really long, hard, and effectively during his teen years. And so you say, okay, if my son or my daughter is going to be a Jefferson level, whatever she's supposed to be, by the time she's 24, is she really ready? Is he really prepared to study that long, hard, and effectively from the time that she's 16 until she's 24? And so we kind of had to deconstruct and reverse engineer, what is it that gets you to a 24-year-old of that level of preparation? And from this, we sort of articulated the phases of learning, because that's where it all came from, was figuring out what does it take to get a Jefferson level, whatever you're supposed to be.
Yeah.
And we learned that in core phase, and not just how did he do it, but what's relevant to our day, to our culture, to our moment in history, right?
I love it. Mm-hmm.
And so it started with core phase. Well, really, it started with scholar phase. We knew that we needed youth that were willing to study long, hard, and effectively. And to do that, they had to have a love of learning and a deep sense of purpose. And so pre-scholar phase came love of learning phase, where they could explore, where they had this opportunity to develop their initiative, where their sense of ownership was not only, permitted, but incentivized. Because you have to really have a sense of ownership to put in that kind of dedication.
You do. And I love that, because I saw that in my kids, and it happened at different ages, right? For different ones. But I saw that when they finally hit that stage, that they were excited in a bigger way to really do their learning, to organize what they needed to organize, and to expound on it even more, where much more than I could have just done on my own. So it's incredibly powerful. Absolutely. Well, that kind of brings us to the next question a little bit. Well,
actually, there's one more piece that comes before love of learning, because love of learning is kind of, let's say scholar phase is from, when you're just sort of starting to get into it, maybe you're 13 or 14, until you graduate into the depth and mission phase that Jefferson had, right? Mm-hmm. That's during your teen years. So let's say maybe 9 to 12-ish, 9 to 13, that's your love of learning phase. And prior to that, you develop a foundation, a core phase that allows you to have that sense of right and wrong and good and bad, true and false. What is your place in the family? What is your relationship with truth? How do you know what truth is? I'm hoping you get an answer yes to that. Is everybody seeing me? Am I frozen for you, Michelle?
You're still frozen for me. But if everybody else can see you, I guess that's the most important thing.
All right.
Why? I'm not really sure what is happening, but anyway, I can hear you, so that's
well.
good.
And I haven't seen anybody saying they're having a problem, so hopefully, but that's good news.
Yeah.
Anyway, so that's the phases of learning. Core phase is the 0 to 8, and if you overprogram that, let me just say this: we have a tendency to idealize what happens in scholar phase. Thanks, Natalie. She says I'm not frozen.
Great.
We have a tendency to idealize the way scholars learn, which is commonly, not exclusively, but commonly, seat time and book study and responding to assignments that a mentor might challenge them with. And we look at that and we tend to try and put that on our littlest kids, because they're so impressionable, they're so willing to please. And yet the problem is that's akin to putting a 6-year-old on point shoes, or putting an 8-year-old on weight training. Right. You might get a talented kid who can perform at that level for a time, but it literally ruins their chances for long-term success. We have to back off of trying to make mini scholars and give them the rich core phase and then the awesome love of learning phase so that they're ready and willing for that scholar phase.
Right.
And then we get the predictable outcome. What comes out on the other end? The Jefferson or Madison level of whatever they need to be. So that's the phases of learning.
I love it because, and what you just shared about younger kids as well, is that you don't want them to get worn out. You don't want them to lose that love of learning, which is so incredibly important to their lifelong goal, their lifelong mission, and everything that they're doing. So I love that you added that in. What benefits have you seen in your own family and others from the TJED education and the way you taught it?
I think it gives me a lot of peace, a lot of focus, and harmony.
Yes.
And confidence. Things seem to fit. They make sense. And I'm sure we'll talk more about this as we go on, but it's like organic. It's a function of a successful family to learn this way. You're not trying to superimpose institutional values on natural family dynamics. The natural family dynamics are, guess what? Shocker, perfect for ideal learning. Yes. And so that's why I say it's so peaceful and so harmonious. It works with the family dynamic to the point that, I mean, I can't get into all the details of it, but literally you do away with the middle child syndrome and you get this thing where everybody gets a chance to be, to grow into their own. There's so much this is like a totally different talk, so I'm not going to go there right now, but let me just say harmony and peace in the family dynamics and great relationships between the kids clear up through adulthood. My kids are their own best friends. They're very sociable. They're very popular with their peers and in their workplace and so forth. But their very favorite people in the world are their own siblings.
And I love that because that is not often the case in this world, right? And so when you take away, if you strip everything away, and the education is huge, but that to me is probably the biggest. And isn't it a beautiful thing to see your family, even after all these years when they're older, and how they get along together and are each other's best friends. And that is so huge. I think that's a whole nother question as far as socialization too, that we could get into, but yeah, maybe you'll come back and expand on that a little bit. I would love to hear a little bit more. So how has the TJED model simplified your homeschooling experience? You sort of touched on that already a little bit.
I'm prepared to speak on that. It kind of filters the noise because I think as homeschoolers, especially when you're new to homeschooling, it can feel like you have all the time in the world, and it's easy to fill that up with every great opportunity, or your neighbor wants you to babysit her kids, or your sister wants you to go out to lunch 3 times a week, whatever. It's you know what I mean? And so it just seems like, or you're busy cleaning your house and you never get around to homeschooling, right? Because it just seems like there's no structure, there's no HAFTAs, or on the opposite end of it, you try to bring public school home and then you regiment your day like if it were on a bell schedule. For me, leadership education kind of filters out the pressures from either of those extremes and all of the great opportunities that, you need to say no to most of them. You really do. And it helps me get clear on what is the next right thing for me and the next right thing for my family. It has seen us through some, I don't want to sound hyperbolic, but we've had some devastating crises as a family. From the traumatic injury of an infant son to my husband's near-death health crash. Because of the way our family was structured, there was a momentum and an order in that chaos where, I'll probably talk about this more, but it brings peace, it synergizes, the family so that it all sort of flows together and makes sense.
I love that. Thank you for sharing, because I knew there was a few things, but I didn't know there was so many big challenges. And I think I can totally see how this kind of education can really make those moments more manageable when you are having to do all these things, but you've got it down to a science. I know for me, I truly had to fight that urge to not do things like the regular schools, because that's what I was used to. And that was hard for me to fight that off and really try and do this different method. And so I think that was sort of a constant thing I had to work on. And I'm sure a lot of other mothers too. So maybe you can address what your top three.
I'll tell you, what you just described is so very common. And it reminds me of, teaching a teenager how to drive. And one of the big, punctuated leaps in their development is when you decide to take them on the freeway. And almost every single time what happens is they start to merge, they see traffic coming for them, and what do? They hit the brake.
Yes.
They get nervous. Mm-hmm. They feel out of their comfort zone, and they want to hit the brake. And because that's their safe place, is stop. And your safe space, my safe space, is the things that we grew up with, the things that are familiar and comfortable. And the thing is, those things are familiar and they're comfortable, but they're not ideal and they're not safe. They don't get what we want.
That is the perfect parallel. That's exactly right. That's exactly what I felt like I was battling, even though I knew this is what I needed to do. This is how I needed to do it. It was a battle. So I think it's good for other people to know that is something that if you're, very rooted in how regular school is done, it might take a little bit to get past that. Well,
and probably, I think we'll probably, I know some of the other questions that you have asked me to think about, so I'm guessing we'll get to a place where we address that. Yes.
So what would you say are your top 3 suggestions for homeschool mothers? I know that's so hard, you could go on and on, but
oh boy, did I go on and on. I literally came up with an 8, a 7, a 6, a 5, a 4, a 3, a 2, and a 1. I'm literally going to have to write a book now in response to the question that you asked me, because there's the 8 qualities of a scholar. There's the 7 keys of great teaching. There's the 6 steps of family reset. There's the 5 habits of highly successful homeschoolers. There's the 4 phases of learning. There's the 3 types of education. There's the 2 myths about education. And there's the 1 you, not them. Of all of those,
love it.
You asked me, what are my top 3 suggestions for homeschool mothers?
Yes. But all those work.
I would have to say, if you are new to homeschool, or if TJED looks like a good lane change for you, go to the TJED.org website and look for the 6 steps of family reset. And it's basically my advice to new or struggling homeschoolers. Or, like I say, you might even be a veteran who's had some good success in the past, but for some reason you're looking for, maybe you've got a child that presents differently than what you're used to or whatever. You're just looking for a new ideal. This family reset for me is everything. To the point that it's not just about detox, which is hugely important, and it does walk you through a great detox. Good. But I call it a family reset, not a detox, for this reason. Typically, we think of detox as something that happens before you start in earnest on your homeschool journey, right? But the family reset is something that we return to over and over and over again whenever the need presents. Something big and wonderful happens, like a new baby, or a loved one dies, or mom is, come down with some sickness that totally disrupts, or we've got some family member coming to live with us. Whatever changes your family dynamic, whether it be big or little, or good or bad, or if it's just one kid that's affected, maybe there's one kid that's sorrowing over something. It has this effect on the family dynamic, and you go to the family reset. And that's just your home base. That's your hit the brakes. Your hit the brakes, your go to your safe base is the family reset. So let me recommend that to you. And I don't want to take all the time for this discussion today on going through those steps, but, and it's also available in, we have a 3-video series on the TJED website. Pretty sure one of those videos addresses the 6 steps too. So that's an option.
Oh, that's fantastic. That is so good to know. I am so glad that you shared that. We've had some different changes in our life, from a traumatic brain injury from my daughter, and now her son is here a lot of the time, and we are often the ones leading the way in different things. And so I'm going to go check it out for us.
Yeah.
But I can
and honestly, some people live in the reset because their life is, maybe they've got a child with chronic health issues, whatever. It literally works to stay there. That
is so fantastic to know.
It's powerful.
Thank you. Okay, I'm excited. I'm checking it out right after we're done here.
Okay.
We've had so many people ask about the phase, the love of learning phase. So what could you say would be your top suggestions for that phase, and how to create that in our lives and in our homeschooling?
Well, first I want to just kind of recap. We talked about the love of learning phase being in a developmentally typical child. It starts at about 9 and goes to about 12 or 13, right? The onset of puberty is sort of a typical transition where you start going into scholar phase. In fact, the transitions in, like I say, developmentally typical children are all tied to biology. It's not just the number of years you've been breathing, right? There are biological markers. And there's a whole different commentary on developmentally atypical children, or children with giftedness, or children with special needs, or whatever. But just to keep it simple, love of learning is that pre-teen stage where the child is interested in a lot of things, not very good at very many. And
yes.
The ideal is not to get them to master anything, but help to feed in them a sense of wonder and a sense of being curious. Curiosity is powerful, and it's okay. You froze there for a second. Are you still with me? Okay.
I am.
Okay. But to empower, yes, the love of learning phase is meant to empower their sense of ownership, to validate their interests, their aptitudes, and to feed their genius. It's not the time to try to fill in every gap or emphasize every deficit. Those things are best worked on from a position of strength, and usually best worked on with a little more maturity. Which isn't to say we can't expose them to whatever, but to really try and perfect the skills and the checklist, or of whatever subject it may be. That's something that there's a time later, and we address this, for filling in the gaps. The love of learning phase is meant to develop that sense of creativity, of interest, of curiosity, and of ownership. And in that spirit, the things that you want to do, it's honestly 100% natural for a developmentally typical child to have a love of learning. So when you ask, how do we help to create a love of learning? You know what? Love them, feed them. It will be there. Now, the real question is, how do we not break their love of learning? That's the real question. Right.
I totally agree. That's a challenge. I know that was a challenge I had.
Because so often we take, like I said before, we take these young kids that are so willing and so able, and we overprogram them to the point that they're overwhelmed. They either rebel or they submit, and neither of those is ideal to come up with that outcome in the end of a person who is passionately committed to their education.
Mm-hmm.
You don't want the rebellious child who just associates everything about learning with negatives. And you don't want the submissive child who does what you say, but nothing more, and only when they're forced. Neither of those gets what you want. So how do we get that love of learning? How do we facilitate it? How do we nurture it? There's a few things. First of all, we have to have the moral authority to promote it. And what I mean by that is we really have to lead out.
Yeah.
You can't tell a child to study when they see nobody in their world studying, and it just becomes, you're bigger than me, so I have to do what you say, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or I have to jump
good.
through this hoop because that's what everybody my age has to do. Neither of those is going to get you the outcome that we're looking for, that lifelong passionate learner with a sense of purpose. Mm-hmm. So with us leading out in the things that are important to me, to you, and this one is a little bit earth-shifting for a lot of people. So many, particularly moms and often dads, so many parents kind of set aside their interests and their passions because they think of that as the dutiful thing to do once they're adulting.
True.
Life has taught them to mind your business, do your job, get up in the morning, pay your dues, and do the, there's this drudgery of being an adult, when really we're trying to get our kids excited about learning and excited about life. We're showing them that adulthood stinks.
You know what? You're so right on, because this was a challenge I had in balancing things when I started, because I thought, I love to read, but where am I going to find the time? So I love that you brought this up, because that's big.
When we lead out with the things that are important to us, whether it's hiking or crafting or music or whatever your things are, you probably have 1 to 5 things that kind of, maybe you haven't done them since you were a child.
Yeah.
But if you can bring 1 or 2 of those things back into your life, that energy infuses your whole home education with a different vibe. That is the catalyst. That's the good stuff. That's the secret sauce. That energy of you care about something, and so it's important to you, and you're going to put energy into it. That's what we're asking our kids to do. So we have to show them. We have to show them. We have to lead out. The one thing that's really important for love of learning is to make sure that our home is simplified. If it's too much clutter, or if there's too much time filled, if either the time or the space is too cluttered, there's no space for creativity. There's no space for that ingenuity that overcomes boredom or frustration, right? You have to keep it simple. And the 6 steps that I referred to you previously will help with that a little bit. Family work is another one.
Say that one more time.
Family work is another one that really helps with love of learning. Reading aloud. I can't think of a better thing that you can do with your kids from the time that they are just, wanting tickles on your lap until they are, pretending to roll their eyes and not listen. Reading aloud is the bomb. It's everything. It makes all the difference. And then there's a family reading ebook you can order on our website. And I don't know the web address, but if you use the search window looking for family reading, several articles will come up. Family reading is huge. In fact, that's one of the 5 habits of highly successful homeschoolers that we recommend in our ebook. You got to minimize distractions. You got to minimize toxic things, and you got to minimize addictive things. If there are relationships or friendships or foods or TV programs or habits or whatever that interfere with the simplicity and peace of your home, you're the big one. You get to decide, no, this is not a part of our home. And doing that, when the peace is restored, even the kids will appreciate that.
They may not appreciate it in that moment, but they will later on. And I think that's such great advice for a lot of parents, because we live in a world that there is so much going on. I love that that vision of simplifying and making it so that they are able to do what they need to do and be creative in ways that are beyond tech, right? Because there's so much of that.
I think a lot of times we think that we live in this golden age of information and what great opportunities we have. I don't know if we're really at that much of an advantage. You look at the quality of education that happened back when people only had the Bible and Plutarch and Shakespeare and possibly, you know, some atlas or anatomy or just one other thing that was sciencey. Those people had an education. They thought deeply and broadly. They were practical thinkers. They were inventive. They were able to meet pretty much any challenge that came their way. They were the definition of successful, educated people. And yes, it's wonderful that I can pull out my phone and find out, you know, who said what or what year did this happen. I think that's fun. But if that's how we run our homeschool, we might be missing out on the joys and the glories of simplicity.
I agree. And you and I, because we're on the other end of things, can probably even look back now and recognize those moments that were simple and beautiful and realize how much that's the thing that we cherish, right? And I know one of my mentors who actually, the one I mentioned earlier, who I lived with for a little while, my senior year of high school and homeschooled her 11. When I asked her what the number one thing is that she did with her kids, it was reading out loud. So exactly the same thing. I think there's power in those moments when sometimes we think it's too simple.
Well, I think of it as that biblical story about Naaman who had leprosy, and he was this powerful man. And so he had heard tell of this great Hebrew prophet. And so he sent word, can you please heal me of my leprosy? I'm a good person. And go wash 7 times in the River Jordan. And the man was the River Jordan. And I've personally seen the River Jordan. It can be unimpressive, I think, to somebody who's seen the world. It's got its own little homely beauty, but it's not very big and it's kind of muddy. There's the idea of going in there to cleanse yourself and be healed. Obviously, it didn't really resonate with this man, but his servant said, now, if he had asked you to do some grand feat, would you not have done it? He said, well, yeah, I guess I would. He said, so why won't you just try what he actually asked you to do? And so I said, you know what? Okay. So he humbled himself and he did this simple thing. And of course, the way the story goes, he was healed. He was cleansed. And this is reading aloud. This is it. Naaman, go to the river and wash. Read aloud with your kids. It sounds simple. It sounds like, well, yeah, but I mean, what about this and that and the other? Until you have tried it, you won't know the power. And I promise you, this is the power of homeschool. It's you in your living room. Everything that you can do well outside of there, you can do better sitting on that couch reading aloud with your kids.
I love it. Yes, I can just second that. That's so beautiful. And what a good story to really share, right? That image of those things that are simple that really are so powerful in our homeschooling. So talking about reading, what would you say are your favorite classics that you read with your kids? Your very favorite. I mean, no, that's hard because there's probably a huge list, but
I mean, there is, and even on our website, we have a tab called Classics where we have several that are recommended there. In fact, you can download, there's a whole list of them that you can download the PDF of them, or they're right there on the website. They're all linked. But Little House series, Little Britches series, Laddie, Heidi, Anne of Green Gables, Carry On Mr. Bowditch, Charlotte's Web. Those are some of my top go-tos, and different ones, you know, for boys or for girls, and different ones for kids who love to be read to, or people who, and I will say this, some kids, depending on their processing style, their innate processing style, some kids take to being read to very early on. And some kids not that much. don't be dissuaded by this. Just stick to the level of their delight. Most of my kids, even the ones that didn't love it originally, by the time they were 8, were actually listening to the story. Some of them would be there because that was the fun place to be. Some of them came because they wanted to cuddle. But they pretty much all came around to actually being able to hear and listen to the story by the time they were 8. And for those that wasn't their thing, picture books, baby. Just stick to whatever works great for them at their level. You don't have to feel like a failure because you're not into chapter books by the time they're 7. Do what works. Keep books fun. And there are some amazing picture books that are those too.
Yes, that's great advice. That's really good advice, because you're right. They all are different. And, but I found with my kids, if I was reading to, let's say, the general masses at that moment, as far as who was interested in what, that the other ones might be playing and listening, or the older ones who think, they're acting like they're doing something else. They're really kind of listening too. So
Yep.
It's interesting how you really can really read to a wide range of ages, depending on what you're doing. Yeah.
I remember reading Charlotte's Web with our youngest 2 kids, and having our college age girl, who was living out of the home at the time, wander through, kind of leaning on the door frame, and she stayed and she stayed and she stayed, and she finally just sat on the couch and had to, because it was just like so warm and comfortable for her, and those kind of precious things where those memories just come through. And they're so, I just, like I said, go to our book, The 5 Habits of Highly Successful Homeschoolers. The part there on reading aloud, if what I've said here doesn't fully, grab you, you've got to read the details, because it's everything. It's everything.
I love it. Thank you. Thank you so much. And at the end, I'm going to have you share your website so that we can make sure everybody has all that information. As you look back, and we've already touched on nobody's perfect, right?
Right.
But are there any regrets or anything you might do a little bit differently in your homeschooling? I mean, we all have regrets. Right?
Oh, yes, we do. I'll tell you, the funny thing is, I mentioned this to my husband and my son-in-law who works with us. And my biggest regrets involve pining over things that weren't in my power to change, or stressing that those things would ruin everything. And so my son-in-law popped up and he said, "So you regret regretting things?" I said, "Well, yeah, I guess that's that's about right." Because I'll tell you, the times when there was a time when I had a very serious illness for several years. And to the point that for one season, I literally hadn't gone up the stairs from my bedroom to the main floor for 18 months.
Wow.
Yeah, that's how fragile I was.
Wow.
And we were homeschooling through that. And there were times when, as you can imagine, I worried about my little teeny kids being raised by my teenage daughters. And I worried about homeschool this and math that. And I just fretted over what could not be. I did not have the power to meet all of these aspirations. And I look back on that time now. My kids would come and congregate on my bed, and I read to them every single day. And I look at what my youth accomplished in terms of who they became and their sense of their place in the family, their place in the world, their moral compass, their education. Guess what? I don't know what I would have done differently coming out on the other end of that, because we still had the simple home where it wasn't all about TV or video games. We still had, the basic things where mom and dad were leading out in our own education and stuff. And I look at that as not a lean time in our family's education. I look at that as a highlight in our family's education. It makes me think of a book written by Dr. Seuss. And a friend challenged him to write a book that used only, and I don't know the exact number. I don't remember clearly. I think it was 50 words or less. And he could use them as many times as he wanted throughout the book, but no more beyond that number of words, whatever it was. Maybe it was 50, maybe it was, I don't know. So he had this constraint on what he was allowed to do in order to create this art. And guess what came of that?
The Foot book? Is that
Green Eggs and Ham.
The Green Eggs and Ham book. Okay.
Green Eggs and Ham book. And what a great, great book. Now, if you measure that book against some book of poetry that has a vast vocabulary, it's going to come up wanting in certain measures. But that's not the measure that's relevant to that book. It's so influential. It's so impactful. It's so, it's funny. It's uplifting. It's everything it needs to be a successful book. And the constraints weren't limiting. It's like the kite string, right? And I'll give you one more example real quick. My oldest son and his wife moved into a 2-bedroom apartment that was a really good deal, right where they wanted to live, but it doesn't have any sort of a yard. And the apartment's quite small. And they're very happy there, but because they don't have a yard, every day or two, we're getting a Marco Polo from them, and they're off in the mountains, or they're at the statuary at the university, or they're whatever. They are constantly making the rest of us envious of the places that they are with their kids, because they just have to get out of the house.
That's so great.
You know what I'm saying? We have to redefine our constraints, not as tragic. They aren't tragic. And yes, some of them are sad. Some of them are cause for grief. Some of them are, there's loss, and there's tender feelings for unmet expectations or disappointment for what won't be. I get that. I promise I get that. But I promise you this, if you are doing what is right in your heart, you can define success within those parameters, and miracles will happen. Miracles. And you will look back on that and say, oh my gosh, I wouldn't change it. Now that I know what I know on the other end of it, I'm really glad. I wouldn't trade, let's say that. I wouldn't trade what I've gained to go back to or before. Sure, there are things that, man, we wouldn't want to do it again, or we wish it would have happened differently, but what we gained is so worth it that we wouldn't go back to where we were. And that's been my experience.
That is such an incredible perspective, because one, I didn't know you went through that. And two, that you were able to see it in a whole different light and embrace the things that you could do, and then be able to see how your other kids could shine during that time when you couldn't do those things to help the others. And that it makes it really seem so feasible and so possible for anybody to do these things, no matter their life situation. And I think, some people could have looked at you and said, without knowing your story,
sure,
oh, they know because whatever, But to hear some of these real life stories and what you were able to do and accomplish, and what your kids were able to do and accomplish amidst those hardships, amidst those things that are really incredibly challenging, but can be so growth promoting. And you saw that in them, and what a beautiful thing.
Yeah, it's easy. People would have a tendency to look at my, happy countenance and my successful family, quote unquote, and say, well, it's easy for you because, or that doesn't apply to me because, look, I've got 2 kids with dyslexia. I've got 2 with dyscalculia. I've got 1 with multiple disabilities who requires 24/7 staffing. My husband has chronic illness. I never know whether he's going to be up days or nights. And I am not complaining about any of it. I'm here to say, if you have a challenge that feels too big to you, I know. I do know. I can't know what yours is, but I know that you can. One way or another, there's a way.
Thank you so much for being inspiring and sharing with all of us that light and the optimism and the power that it is possible no matter what you're going through. I'm so excited that you were here today and that you were able to share with everybody that was on and everyone that will be able to listen afterwards. And we'll go ahead and put your website and other information down below so that everyone will be able to get on and be able to see more about the Thomas Jefferson Education and what it can do to fill their lives and change their lives and their families. Thank you so much, Rachel.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been delightful, Michelle.
It's been wonderful. Have a beautiful day.
You too.